The fluorescent lights hummed their constant mechanical prayer above the trauma bay as Katie Morrison hung before bag with hands that looked like any other nurse's hands. Steady. Competent. Forgettable. She'd spent 12 years training those hands to thread needles through darkness, to apply tourniquets one-handed while rounds snapped past her ear, to hold a dying soldier's hand so he wouldn't die alone in the sand. Now they hung saline bags under lights that buzzed like they were counting down to something. Cedar Creek Medical ER on a Tuesday morning in Raleigh smelled like antiseptic and old coffee and the particular desperation that lives in waiting rooms. She positioned herself with the exit visible in her peripheral vision, a habit from Ramadi that she couldn't turn off, that muscle memory ran deeper than conscious will. No one noticed. That was the point. Dr. Pierce walked past her station around 8:06 a.m., his white coat moving like a sail catching wind that no one else could feel. He was the kind of man who entered rooms and took up all the oxygen. Tall. Confident. The sort of surgeon who'd trained at Johns Hopkins and never let anyone forget it, not that he needed to. His watch cost more than Katie's car, and he wore it like a weapon. He glanced at Katie as she worked, his eyes sliding across her pale blue scrubs without really seeing her, the way you might look at a vending machine and not remember what it looked like 30 seconds after walking past. A nurse. One of dozens. Competent enough. Quiet. The kind of staff member who didn't ask questions or demand raises or make waves. He smiled to himself and moved toward the attending physician station, already checking his phone for messages from people who mattered. Katie felt the weight of his dismissal the way soldiers feel the weight of air before an IED detonates. She didn't flinch. Her jaw tightened, just barely, and she adjusted the 4-drip rate with the same precision she used to adjust weapon sights. 100 ml per hour. The bag hung like a small transparent heart, dripping life into a patient who would never know the hands that saved them had also held a M16A4 across a rooftop in Fallujah, had squeezed a trigger while screaming her unit's call sign into a radio, had carried a Marine through sniper fire with his blood soaking her uniform and his arm around her neck. 3 blocks. That's how far she'd carried him to the evac point. 3 blocks under fire. 19 minutes from bullet to triage to surgery. He lived. At 11:13 p.m., in her apartment on Pinewood Avenue, Katie sat alone on the edge of her bed with trembling hands, but not from fear. From memory. From the weight of what she was holding. The folded triangular flag lay across her palms like something holy, like something that had cost more than money. 13 stars visible through the plastic where she kept it, pressed between her stethoscope and a paperback copy of a novel she'd started 3 times and never finished. The flag had been folded by hands trained in military funeral ceremonies, folded the way only Marines knew how to fold them, with precision and respect and the terrible finality of government-ordered erasure. She ran her fingers across the stars, tracing their embroidered geometry like Braille, like a prayer in a language she'd been ordered to forget. Her call sign was Reaper 6. That had been classified. That had been erased. That was supposed to be gone. But hands remember what minds are ordered to forget. She pressed the flag against her chest and didn't let herself cry. Crying was a luxury for people with normal jobs and normal histories. She was a nurse at Cedar Creek Medical earning $42,000 a year with a non-disclosure agreement that extended into jurisdictions that probably didn't exist on any map she could access. She put the flag back in the locker. She lay down in the dark. She listened to the rain start against her window and thought about the man in bed 7 who used to know her name, who used to call her Reaper 6 in that radio tone that meant the difference between living and dying, and now he asked other nurses for ice chips without looking in her direction. Bed 7 was occupied by a Marine named Cortez with shrapnel scars that mapped the geography of a 2019 firefight across his forearm. The scars were white now, old enough to be stable, but the story they told was written in ink below them. Katie had seen it yesterday when she changed his dressing, a tattoo in military font that read Reaper 6 saved my life, Ramadi 2019, 30 seconds. 30 seconds was how long the window had been. 30 seconds before the sniper got a better angle, 30 seconds before the support team moved too close and triggered the secondary charge, 30 seconds before the entire tactical situation collapsed like a building falling on slow motion. She'd gotten Cortez out in 28. He'd been unconscious, bleeding from a femoral artery wound, his left arm hanging wrong, and she'd slung him over her shoulders with a field tourniquet applied in darkness while her unit provided suppressing fire. She'd counted her steps. 84 paces to the evac point. Some numbers lived in the body longer than others. When Katie passed Cortez's bed this morning at 10:33 a.m., he was awake and staring at the water droplets running down the window like he was reading a message written in rain. His eyes tracked her for a moment, the professional assessment of a trained observer noting movement, assessing threat level, and then they slid away. Recognition failed. She was just a nurse now. Just someone in scrubs hanging 4 bags and checking vitals and writing notes in a chart that used language neutral enough that it could have been written by a machine. She moved with fluid precision to his bedside, checking the monitor numbers, assessing his color, his respiratory rate, his level of consciousness. The monitor showed 87 for 02 Saturday. Good. Normal. His heart rate was elevated but stable. She made a note and turned to leave. Ice chips. His voice was hoarse from days of sedation being pulled back gradually. Could you ask her? The blonde one? She brought them last time. Katie nodded without turning back. I'll have her stop by. She didn't flinch. She didn't flinch because flinching was a luxury, and she was a nurse at Cedar Creek Medical, and that meant she floated above the water and never let anyone see how deep her feet had to reach to touch bottom. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how quiet her own voice had become. How small. She sounded like someone apologizing for existing. I'll have her stop by was the voice of someone who had learned not to take up space, not to demand recognition, not to exist in a way that anyone would remember 30 seconds after she left the room. Dr. Pierce was in the hallway at 11:27 a.m. when Katie emerged from the medication dispensary with a 500 milliliters bag of normal saline. She had to pass him to reach the elevator. He was on his phone, one hand in his coat pocket, his expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who had just made a decision that benefited him. As she walked past, he glanced up, really glanced up, made eye contact, and his mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd been watching her. She realized this with the same clarity that soldiers feel when they realize they're being targeted. His eyes held her for a beat longer than necessary, and then he looked away, but not before she caught the calculation moving behind his expression. The kind of calculation that precedes action. That precedes choice. The break room at noon was a study in social architecture. Katie sat at her usual table near the window, the one with the broken chair that no one ever fixed, and unwrapped a sandwich she'd made the night before. Turkey. Tomato. Mustard. The kind of meal that didn't draw attention. Around her, the room performed its daily ritual of exclusion with the precision of choreography. Sarah from pediatrics walked in with her salad, made eye contact with 3 other nurses, and then her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way a dog tightens when it catches the scent of another dog that isn't welcome. She gathered her container of Caesar dressing and moved to a table near the window on the far side of the room. James from trauma intake came in next, nodded at Katie out of residual politeness, and then something made him hesitate. His shoulders shifted. He picked his bag back up and left, taking his coffee to somewhere that wasn't here. Katie ate her sandwich in silence. The break room smelled like microwaved fish from someone's lunch 3 days ago and burnt coffee from a pot that hadn't been cleaned in a week. She could hear the rain starting outside, that particular percussion of drops hitting the window with increasing urgency. No one sat near her. No one spoke to her. The light from the fluorescent panels above cast everything in the color of institutional disappointment, and Katie understood with the clarity that comes from training that this was exactly how Dr. Pierce wanted things. This was stage 1 of something she recognized from military operations. Isolation. Compartmentalization. The systematic removal of social support systems. It made people vulnerable. It made them desperate. It made them make mistakes. She finished her sandwich and threw away the wrapper, the plastic making a soft whisper as it fell into the trash. Around her, the break room began to empty as nurses hurried back to their assignments, back to their invisible walls of protection, back to the careful distance that Pierce had made clear was career policy. The hospital was good at creating these invisible structures. Everyone felt them. Almost no one spoke about them. Katie had learned in Ramadi that the most effective control mechanisms were the ones that didn't require anyone to explicitly state the rules. The rules lived in the air like radiation. Everyone absorbed them without being told. She picked up her empty container and walked back to the ER, moving through the hallways with the steady gait of someone who had learned long ago not to hurry, not to show emotion, not to give anyone the satisfaction of knowing that she noticed the way doors closed slightly when she approached, the way conversations shifted register when she came within hearing distance. The afternoon stretched ahead of her like a corridor with no visible exit, and Katie Morrison moved through it with the same composure that had saved lives in desert she wasn't allowed to talk about, and would cost her everything in a hospital that thought she was just another nurse. The 4-bag hung precisely at shoulder height, exactly as protocol required, exactly as the Martinez family watched her adjust it for the third time because their 10-year-old daughter was already nervous, and Katie had learned that sometimes what patients needed wasn't medicine but the knowledge that someone was paying attention. She was checking the drip rate, 17 milliliters per hour for the pediatric saline bolus, when Dr. Pierce's voice cut across the unit like a scalpel through silk. "Nurse Morrison, are you quite certain you can handle a simple peripheral line, or should I retrieve someone with actual competence?" The question hung in the air of Bay 7, loud enough that the Martinez family's heads turned in unison, loud enough that the resident at the neighboring station froze mid-keystroke. Katie's jaw tightened. Not visibly. Not in a way that would register on any external measurement. But inside, in the space between her ribs, something sharp and familiar coiled tight, the same sensation she'd felt in Ramadi when incoming fire announced itself by the sound of shattering glass. She didn't turn to face him. She didn't lower the 4-bag or step back or offer apologies. Her hands remained steady as surgical steel as she confirmed the catheter placement one final time, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who had started lines under fire, in darkness, while rounds snapped past her head. "The placement is secure, doctor," she said. Her voice carried the flat neutrality of someone delivering a weather report. No inflection. No edge. No satisfaction. Just fact. Pierce moved closer, close enough that Mr. Martinez straightened in his chair, that protective stance fathers adopted when they sensed conflict. "See that she doesn't compromise the line further," Pierce said, addressing the family now, performing for the audience. "We'll have someone double-check her work." He turned on his heel and walked away, his footsteps sharp against the tile, the sound of someone who believed volume was the same as victory. Katie secured the 4 with fresh tape, her movements precise and unhurried. She adjusted the monitor settings, confirmed the vitals one more time, oxygen saturation 98, heart rate 92, rhythm steady and even, and made eye contact with Mrs. Martinez for exactly 2 seconds. "Your daughter's going to be fine. The fluids will help the fever break within the next few hours. If you need anything, press the call button." What she didn't say was that she could hear a peripheral line complication from 2 rooms away just by the pitch of the alarm, that she'd started an 4 on a 22-year-old Marine with a collapsed vein and a hemorrhagic shock state while dust from an IED blast still hung in the air, that she'd done it with a single-use needle and a blood pressure cuff because that was all they had, and that Marine was still alive because her hands didn't forget how to work under pressure. But that information belonged to a version of herself that didn't exist in this hospital, so she kept it folded away like that flag in her locker and moved to the next patient. The break room smelled of burnt coffee and the particular staleness that accumulated in a space where people never quite relaxed. Katie had learned to time her lunch breaks for the 14-minute window when most staff rotated out, enough time to eat without witnessing the careful choreography of colleagues gathering their food and leaving the moment she entered. Today that timing failed her. She was halfway through her turkey sandwich when Sarah came through the door, followed by Jennifer, followed by Tom. Sarah's eyes went wide in that particular way that meant she had not anticipated Katie's presence. "Oh, I forgot I have that thing with the pharmacy," Sarah said, her voice climbing at the end like she was posing a question to someone invisible. She was already backing toward her lunch bag. "The thing," Katie repeated, her tone completely neutral. She didn't look up from her sandwich. Yeah, the inventory reconciliation. Tom, didn't we? Right, we should probably get ahead of that, Tom said, and within 30 seconds the table had emptied like someone had flipped a switch. Katie's hands remained steady around her sandwich. The trembling wasn't fear. It was the discipline of not allowing fear to manifest. She had learned that distinction the first time she wore boots and a uniform, understood it deeply by the time Ramadi taught her what happened when soldiers let their hands shake. She finished her meal methodically rinsed her container, and did not think about the fact that she had eaten alone yesterday and the day before, and would eat alone tomorrow. The public whiteboard at the unit desk had been her classroom once, the place where competence was recognized, where wins were celebrated. Today it was a confession written in aggressive red marker that she could see from 3 stations away. Every staff member who passed the desk saw it. Every family member waiting in the bay chairs saw it. Every resident and attending and pharmaceutical rep who entered the unit saw it. Katie read it once, committed the details to the same place where she kept classified information and the names of people who weren't coming home, and returned to charting on her patient in Bay 4 without changing her breathing pattern. The next entry in the chart was a note from Pierce describing her suggestion, the one about using doxycycline instead of ciprofloxacin for the elderly patient with sepsis and a history of fluoroquinolone-resistant infections, as a nurse overstepping scope of practice. What he hadn't written was that doxycycline had a proven efficacy advantage in combat casualties with gram-negative sepsis, that she'd read the latest research from the Journal of Military Medicine published 6 weeks ago, that the patient's symptoms aligned with a resistant profile that would make Pierce's choice ineffective. But competence wasn't the currency in this building. Authority was. The afternoon arrived shaped like a corner, the kind of moment where conversations happened that determined which way everything fell. Pierce cornered her at the nurse's station while she was pulling the medication record for Bay 6, his shadow crossing over the monitor before his voice did. "You know what you are, Morrison." His hands were in his pockets, casual, the posture of someone confident in his power. "You're a ghost. No verifiable credentials anyone can actually trace. No references that check out. Honestly, I'm beginning to think you simply pretend to know what you're doing, and people are too polite to tell you the truth." 2 residents sat 2 stations over. They were definitely listening. They were definitely looking away. Katie's hands didn't move from the keyboard. She met his eyes for exactly as long as it took to acknowledge that she'd heard him. Her voice came out level and measured, like she was confirming a medication dose. "Understood, doctor." "Good. Because competence matters here. Credentials matter. And whatever fairy tale you've constructed about yourself, I can see through it." He smiled the way predators smile when they sense something wounded. "You should think about whether this job is really the right fit for someone like you." She didn't respond. She'd learned that silence was its own form of power, that the need to defend yourself was often the first thing enemies looked for, and she had too many enemies in this hospital to give them that satisfaction. Pierce waited for a rebuttal that didn't come, then walked away, apparently satisfied that he'd drawn blood. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part happened 3 hours later, in the supply closet behind the medication bay, when Katie was restocking the faucets and found the invoices. She wasn't looking for them. She was reaching for the box of 20-gauge angiocards when her hand caught the edge of a clipboard that shouldn't have been there. The billing sheet for Apex Medical Solutions slid out, and Katie's training, the same training that taught her to read a room's pressure before a negotiation, to spot an ambush from a single out-of-place detail, caught on 3 numbers immediately. 52 cardiac monitor leads billed to orthopedic trauma cases. 18 units of Reboa balloon catheters charged to an acute care unit that didn't do vascular interventions. A hemostatic gauze order for 300 units marked as delivered and administered, spread across for patients who were treated by Pierce personally, patients Katie had charted on, patients she had been present for. And none of them had received hemostatic gauze. She was certain. Certainty was her job. Her phone was in her scrub pocket. The camera was steady as she photographed 2 invoices, getting the account numbers and the signature lines, Pierce's name watermarked across the authorization fields. The supply closet smelled of antiseptic and plastic and the particular staleness of spaces where nobody ever looked too carefully. Katie photographed the invoice date, March 14th through April 2nd, and her mind was already working the mathematics of it, the pattern recognition that had once kept her alive in desert streets where discrepancies could mean the difference between an ambush and an exit route. 300 units of equipment that was never used. Charged to Cedar Creek Medical. Approved by Dr. Pierce. And delivered to someone who had a name, Richard something, that appeared on every invoice in the delivery authorization line. The next morning, before shift change, her access card stopped working on the supply database. She tried it 3 times. The system rejected her with a soft beep that somehow managed to sound judgmental. When she flagged it with IT, they said the access revocation came from an administrative directive issued at 11:13 p.m., signed by Pierce, marked urgent. Her schedule changed that same morning. The physical printout appeared in her mailbox without notification, without the courtesy of advance warning. Starting next week, overnight shift, pediatric unit, no exceptions, no flexibility. The message was written in the white space between the words, "We're moving you. We're isolating you. We're making sure you can't ask questions during business hours when people are listening." But Pierce made one mistake. He made one phone call that Katie overheard while she was replacing the crash cart defibrillator pads in the alcove near his office. His door was closed but not soundproof. Hospital architecture was usually designed around clinical efficiency, not privacy. "Richard, we have a staff issue that needs addressing. She's asking questions about the Apex contracts." Pause. Then, "No, I don't think she's a problem yet, but prevention is better than crisis management. Make sure her database access is cut." Katie's hands didn't stop moving. She finished placing the pads, closed the crash cart, and walked away at a normal pace. But the calculations were already happening in her head, the same pattern recognition that had kept her intact through Ramadi, through the ambush at the supply checkpoint, through the moment when her team leader took a round meant for her and didn't get up. The conspiracy wasn't contained to Pierce. There was a Richard somewhere in this system, someone with enough power to access hospital directives at midnight, someone integrated enough into the infrastructure to coordinate with the guy writing billing invoices. By afternoon, a new protocol appeared on the unit. All medication suggestions from nursing staff would require written authorization and senior resident approval before implementation. The memo was printed and distributed to everyone, and it appeared immediately after Katie had suggested a different antibiotic regimen during rounds. The patient was septic, a 73-year-old who came in with a urinary tract infection that had progressed into systemic infection. Pierce wanted ciprofloxacin. Katie had noticed the patient's chart mentioned previous fluoroquinolone use, and the literature, the recent field medicine literature she'd read at 3 in the morning because old habits never really died, indicated doxycycline would be more effective. "Doctor, based on her history, doxycycline at 100 milligrams twice daily might." Pierce's response came out before she finished the sentence. "Excuse me." His voice was the one he used when he wanted witnesses. "You do not countermand my orders. You are a nurse, not a physician." "Write her up for insubordination," he said, addressing the unit clerk without ever looking at Katie. "New protocol, effective immediately. Nursing suggestions go through proper channels." The way he said it, the casual cruelty of it, the bureaucratic precision, was almost impressive. He wasn't just undermining her competence. He was institutionalizing it. He was making sure that even if she was right, even if her experience was real, the system itself would neutralize her. Katie administered the ciprofloxacin because that was the order, because she was a professional, because her hands had learned years ago that rage could wait. The patient received the medication. Katie documented it. And in Bay 7, the young Marine with the scarred forearm, the one with her call sign tattooed across his skin, watched the entire exchange with eyes that had suddenly sharpened, eyes that tracked Katie the way soldiers tracked anomalies in terrain, eyes that suggested, just for a moment, that he might have finally remembered who he was looking at. But then the moment passed. He asked the pretty nurse for more ice chips. And Katie charted on as if nothing had changed, as if her access card hadn't been revoked, as if her schedule hadn't been rewritten, as if there wasn't a conspiracy she could now see spreading through the hospital's infrastructure like an infection that nobody else seemed equipped to recognize. She had 1 week left in the morning shift. 1 week before they moved her to nights, to isolation, to where her questions couldn't bother anyone who mattered. 1 week before everything changed. The ER doors exploded open at 2:38 p.m. A man filled the entrance like a storm front, 6'5", 250 pounds, his shoulders taking up the space where two normal people would stand. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, moving in jerking sweeps across the waiting room. The pistol in his right hand caught the fluorescent light as he raised it toward the ceiling. "Where's the doctor who killed my brother?" His voice cracked on the last word. The waiting room turned to static, screams, chairs scraping backward, a child crying somewhere near pediatrics. Mrs. Chen, the triage nurse, bolted from her station and ran toward the back hallway. The two med students who had been reviewing charts scattered like startled birds. An elderly man in the waiting area with his arm in a sling stood frozen for exactly 2 seconds before his daughter grabbed him and pulled him toward the emergency exit. The gunman fired once into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down like snow. The sound was impossibly loud, a concussive whip crack that echoed through every artery of the hospital. Someone's clipboard clattered to the floor. The chaos crystallized into pure instinct, survival. Run. Hide. Get out. Katie Morrison set down her clipboard on the medication cart. She had been hanging an IV bag for the patient in bed for when the doors opened, a routine potassium infusion that was nearly complete. The fluorescent lights above her hummed their mechanical monotone. She didn't turn. She didn't accelerate her movements. She finished securing the IV line with the slow, deliberate precision of someone who had learned long ago that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then she turned. The gunman was now 30 feet away, his barrel still raised, his breathing coming in ragged gasps that sounded like they were tearing something inside him. Behind the medication room door, she caught a flash of white pierce his face, his phone in his trembling hand, the door to the supply closet closing behind him with a soft click. She catalogued it without emotion. Fear made people predictable. Katie walked toward the gunman. Her hands came up slowly, palms forward, positioned at shoulder height where he could see them clearly. She was moving at a normal pace, not rushed, not slow enough to seem hesitant. Just a person walking across a room. Just a voice that belonged to someone calm. "Sir," she said. Her tone was level, even, the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse. "I can see you're in pain." The gunman's barrel wavered. His eyes snapped toward her, unfocused at first, then sharpening with something that looked like surprise, as if he'd expected only fear from the people in this building, and now he was seeing something his grief hadn't prepared him for. Katie kept walking. 10 more feet between them. Then 8. "Tell me your brother's name," she said. This was the language she had learned in Ramadi, sitting across from men at checkpoints who had every reason to pull a trigger. Pain was data. Rage was information about suffering. You didn't meet either one with weapons or commands. You met it with the sound of a human being who understood that the worst thing in the world had already happened to them, and nothing you could say would make it worse. "Marcus," the gunman said. His voice broke like ice fracturing. "Marcus Holloway. They let him die. They let him die and nobody even," his shoulders began to collapse inward. His breath came in shaking gasps. The pistol's barrel dipped slightly, no longer aimed at the ceiling but not at Katie either. Just hanging at his side like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'm so sorry about Marcus," Katie said. She was 6 feet away now. Close enough that she could see his eyes were the grey blue of a winter sky, full of a grief so deep it looked like drowning. Close enough that she could smell the gun oil and the sweat and the desperation that clung to him like humidity. "Put the weapon down and we can talk about what happened to him." "About Marcus?" "We can talk." Behind the supply closet door, Dr. Pierce watched through the crack where hinges met frame. His phone was frozen in his hand. His breathing had gone shallow. Katie Morrison, the nurse he had systematically dismantled over the past 6 weeks, the the one he had cornered in the break room, the one he had written up, the one he had made invisible, was walking toward a man with a gun the way someone walks toward a familiar doorway. The gunman's shoulders heaved. Once. Twice. The sound that came out of him was animal, primal, a sob that started somewhere deep in his chest and tore its way out like shrapnel. His knees buckled. Katie was there in 3 quick strides, her hand coming up to his wrist with the gentleness of someone who had learned that the strongest thing you could do in a moment of someone else's collapse was to hold them steady. The pistol fell to the tile floor. It landed with a hollow clang that echoed through the empty waiting room. Katie's other hand came up, not grabbing, just present, and she guided him down to a sitting position against the wall. His face was in his hands now, his entire body shaking with sobs that seemed to be coming from somewhere beyond grief, somewhere beyond rage, from the place where a man who had lost everything finally understood that no amount of fury was going to bring Marcus back. "Hey!" Katie's voice was soft now, intimate, the way you talk to someone in a dark room at 3 in the morning when the world is small enough to hold in a whisper. "You're going to be okay. You're safe now. Tell me about Marcus. Tell me what happened." And that's when the second event cascaded into motion. Behind her, Katie's peripheral vision caught movement, the young Marine from bed 7, the one with her call sign tattooed on his forearm, the one who had never acknowledged her in 3 weeks of hospitalization. He had rolled out of his bed despite the monitors still attached to his chest. The 4 line hung from his arm, swaying like a snake as he crawled toward the exit on his hands and knees, his eyes locked on Katie's profile with a focus that was suddenly, violently sharp. His lips moved. She didn't hear the words over the gunman's sobs and the distant sirens now wailing into existence outside, growing closer with every second. But she saw them. She read them in the shape of his mouth, Reaper 6. The recognition hitting his face like electricity was a small thing, almost invisible. Almost easy to miss if you weren't watching for it. But Katie had spent enough time around soldiers to know what that look meant. That was the moment when someone you thought forgotten suddenly remembered exactly who you were. The gunman in front of her was still sobbing, still pouring out the story of a brother who had gone into Cedar Creek Medical 3 weeks ago for what was supposed to be routine appendix surgery and never came home. His voice was hollow, echoing through the empty waiting room like a ghost made of sound. Pierce remained in the supply closet, phone still frozen in his trembling hand, watching the scene unfold like a man observing his own execution from a distance. And Katie Morrison, nurse at Cedar Creek Medical, former captain of the 75th Ranger Regiment, holder of a folded flag with 3 crossed-out faces, sat on the cold tile floor beside a grieving man and listened to the story of Marcus Holloway with the kind of attention that most people in this hospital had never learned to give anything. The sirens were getting closer. The gunman's shoulders collapsed inward. His breathing came in ragged heaves, the pistol wavering in his trembling grip. Katie stepped forward with the same measured pace she'd used 100 times crossing hostile territory, each step deliberate, each movement visible, hands open at her sides where he could see them. "I've got you," she said quietly. "You're safe now." His eyes found hers. Something in her voice, the absence of fear, the weight of absolute certainty, broke through the rage. The pistol lowered. Katie reached out, her fingers closing around the grip with practiced ease. She engaged the safety. The click was a period at the end of a sentence. He collapsed to his knees, his body folding like someone had cut the strings holding him upright, sobs tearing from his chest in waves that shook the entire bay. Katie set the weapon on the crash cart and knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder, saying nothing. Sometimes the greatest mercy is simply bearing witness to someone's grief. That was when she saw her. A woman behind an overturned visitor's chair, 70 feet from the gunman's position, clutching her blouse. Blood spreading across the fabric in the shape of a continent. Stray round. Ceiling shot. The woman's mouth was open, trying to draw air that wouldn't come. Sucking chest wound, that sound, the pneumatic hiss of air being pulled through a hole that shouldn't exist, the lungs collapsing inward like a building imploding from the inside out. Katie moved. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She simply rose and walked toward the crash cart with the same calm authority, grabbed the defibrillator pads, the airway kit, and the instrument tray. Her eye scanned the supplies. Scalpels. Hemostats. Clamps. Everything she needed, because Cedar Creek had learned long ago that Katie Morrison knew exactly what equipment she required in any emergency. She had never explained why. Pierce had never asked. "Clear the bay," Katie called out, her voice dropping an octave, the deferential nurse-to-doctor register vanishing entirely. "I need space. Now." The ER staff moved without hesitation. Her tone carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Katie tore open the woman's blouse. The wound was a dark opening the size of a quarter, below the left breast, maybe 2 inches left of the nipple. Entry wound. The tissue around it was already discoloring, the skin taking on that bruised appearance that meant internal bleeding, meant the lung was collapsing, meant the patient had minutes. The woman's oxygen saturation would be plummeting. Her blood pressure already dropping. Her body was betraying her from the inside out. "I need to do a field thoracotomy," Katie said, not asking, stating. "Here. Now. Or she dies before transport." No one contradicted her. She opened the crash cart surgical tray, found the 14-gauge scalpel, and her hands moved without conscious thought. 8 years of medical training combined with 4 years of combat trauma surgery in field conditions, in convoy trucks, in compounds, in the back of Black Hawk screaming across the desert with nothing but adrenaline and the absolute knowledge that hesitation meant death. Muscle memory took over completely. The incision went between the 4th and 5th ribs, clean and confident. The blade parted the skin, the muscle tissue beneath, the layers peeling back like pages in a terrible book. She spread the ribs with her fingers, exposing the chest cavity. The lung was collapsed, the tissue dark and useless. There, the bleeder. A small arterial branch, torn by the bullets, tumbled through the thorax. Katie grabbed a hemostat and clamped it with the kind of precision that comes from having done this same procedure at 2:02 a.m. in a compound in Ramadi while mortar rounds hammered the walls. The bleeding stopped. O2 sat to the monitor. Her hands moved. Blood clamp. Pressure dressing. The woman's breathing eased incrementally. The chest was rising again, the lung re-expanding with audible relief, that sound like a tire being re-inflated, the opposite of the sucking wound, now silent. "She's stable," Katie said, stepping back. Transferring to surgical team. Dr. James Chen, the trauma surgeon, arrived from upstairs. He stopped dead, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like grudging respect. "Who the hell taught you to?" Pressures holding at 110 systolic, Katie cut him off, her voice professional and even. Lung re-inflated. Bleeder clamped. "She's ready for the OR." She stepped aside. The surgical team moved in with their stretcher, their practiced efficiency, their years of traditional training. Katie didn't watch them leave. She was already turning away, peeling off her gloves, disposing of them in the sharps container like the procedure had been routine, like she hadn't just performed a field thoracotomy in a civilian hospital using equipment from a crash cart and muscle memory from a war zone. That was when she saw Dr. Pierce. He was standing 10 feet away, half hidden behind a supply closet's open door, one eye visible, watching. His face was absolutely still. Not shocked. Not grateful. Not concerned about the patient's outcome. Calculating. Katie met his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. She didn't blink. Didn't look away. Didn't apologize. She simply finished removing her gloves and walked back to the nursing station, where the monitors beat their mechanical rhythm and the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song and the ER returned to its broken normal. But nothing had changed for Dr. Pierce. Everything had changed. Within an hour, Katie was summoned to his office on the 3rd floor. The walls were the color of eggshell, decorated with diplomas from Johns Hopkins and Princeton, with awards for administrative excellence, with a photograph of Pierce shaking hands with the hospital's board chairman. He was sitting behind his mahogany desk when she arrived, his posture relaxed, his hands folded on the blotter. "You performed a surgical procedure without attending physician supervision," he said flatly. That's grounds for immediate suspension from nursing duties. Permanent termination pending board review. Katie's composure didn't crack. The patient was dying. No attending was present. I performed an emergency intervention within scope of care. You performed a thoracotomy. Pierce's voice was cold. Clinical. A procedure reserved for surgeons. You violated every protocol in our accreditation standards. I'm documenting this as reckless endangerment and gross misconduct. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a letter, printed and signed, detailing her suspension effective immediately. Her ID badge was sitting on the corner of the desk like an exhibit in a trial. I'll need your credentials documentation within 24 hours, Pierce continued. Your military service records, your discharge papers, your references from your previous employers. All of it. Submitted in writing. Without full documentation, your nursing license will be flagged in the state system. Katie reached for her badge. My service record was classified. When I separated from the military, I was ordered to disappear. Officially, I don't exist. I can't provide documentation because the government erased it. Pierce smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment, savoring it like an expensive wine. So you invented your military service, he said softly. You created an entire false background to justify reckless behavior. You lied to hospital administration during your hiring interview. That's fraud. I'm escalating this to security. They'll escort you out. Katie stood. She didn't respond. She had learned in Ramadi that sometimes the only power you retain is refusing to give someone the argument they're trying to provoke. She picked up her badge, set it back on his desk, and turned toward the door. Security will be waiting at the elevator, Pierce called after her. You're finished at Cedar Creek, Captain. He used the rank like an insult. Like the word itself was contemptible. Katie didn't turn around. The walk to the employee exit took 6 minutes. She collected her personal items from her locker, a cracked NASA mug someone had given her years ago, a wilting succulent she'd been meaning to water, a photo of her fire team from Ramadi. In the image, 6 soldiers stood in tactical gear in front of a compound wall. Katie was on the left. Her call sign, Reaper 6, was scrawled underneath in someone else's handwriting. She had crossed out 3 of the other faces long ago. Black Sharpie. 1 line through each name. She couldn't even remember the 4th Marine's face anymore. That loss felt larger than getting fired. Security was polite. They gave her a cardboard box for her belongings, walked her to the hospital's main entrance, and watched as she stepped out into the Raleigh afternoon. It was raining. Not a gentle rain. The kind that hammered the parking lot like applause from an angry crowd, that soaked through clothes in seconds, that made everything look exactly like how things felt. Katie stood at the bus stop 3 blocks away, her cardboard box already waterlogged and beginning to collapse, the mug and succulent and photograph visible through the disintegrating bottom. She held it against her hip with one arm, her scrubs clinging to her skin, water running down her face from her hair. No one at the bus stop made eye contact. Just another person going nowhere with nowhere to go. She didn't feel anything. That was the worst part. Not anger, not fear, not even desperation. Just the profound emptiness that comes from watching everything you've built get erased in a single conversation with someone who smiled while destroying it. The bus arrived in 7 minutes. The doors opened. Katie stepped inside, paid her fare, and sat in the back row. But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. 3 days later, everything she understood about her own survival was about to change, and she had no way of knowing that the viral video of a woman walking toward a gunman with her hands visible and her voice level had already traveled faster than any bus, spreading through social media like a contagion, collecting millions of views, attracting attention from people who recognized exactly what they were seeing when they watched a former Special Forces officer talk down a desperate man with the kind of authority that only comes from having already survived the worst. And in a hospital bed in Cedar Creek Medical's East Wing, a young Marine with her call sign tattooed on his forearm had finally finally seen her face. The video had been watched 4.7 million times by the time Katie walked back through the doors of Cedar Creek Medical. 3 days. That's all it took. A visitor's phone. A 30-second clip of a woman in pale blue scrubs walking toward a man holding a pistol, her hands visible, her voice steady, the kind of calm that doesn't come from training manuals but from having already survived things that would break most people. The clip spread like contagion through social media, collecting comments from people who recognized exactly what they were seeing, the precise body language of someone who had negotiated with people who wanted her dead. The union hearing had forced the hospital's hand. They couldn't fire her for saving a life. Not on video. Not with 4.7 million witnesses. Katie returned to the East Wing on a Thursday morning, her badge reinstated, her access restored, and the atmosphere in the ER shifted the moment her shoes touched the tile. Nurses who had abandoned her at lunch tables suddenly found reasons to pass her station. Residents who had avoided eye contact suddenly needed her advice on floor placement. In bed 7, the young Marine with the shrapnel scars was sitting up, his arm visible, the tattoo dark and unmistakable, Reaper 6. Her call sign. He'd been there in Ramadi when she'd carried him 3 blocks under sniper fire, his leg shattered, his voice screaming for his mother, and she'd kept moving because stopping meant dying and he needed to live. He watched her chart vitals at the nursing station. His eyes focused. Actually focused, as if seeing her for the first time since he'd arrived. When she passed his bed during rounds, he whispered it, Reaper 6, just her name, just her call sign, the words carrying weight that no civilian could measure. Katie didn't stop. She glanced at him. Nodded once. Kept walking. The tiniest acknowledgement of a connection forged in dust and blood and the kind of fear that never quite leaves your chest. But that wasn't the worst part for Dr. Marcus Pierce. That wasn't even close. By the window in room 7, another Marine, older, with a prosthetic leg resting against the bed frame, pulled up something on his phone. His movements were deliberate. He scrolled through the Department of Defense personnel database with the kind of access only active duty officers retain, and there it was, Morrison, Catherine Elizabeth. Captain, United States Army Special Forces Command. Bronze star with Valor. Silver star. 2 purple hearts. And beneath that, a photo from 2012, Katie in dress uniform, her jaw tight, her eyes carrying that particular exhaustion that comes from having spent 3 years watching people die. The Marine read aloud. Slow. Deliberate. Captain Morrison's Bronze Star with Valor citation. For carrying 3 wounded soldiers through hostile Ramadi territory under sustained sniper fire, a distance of approximately 800 meters, while maintaining suppressive return fire and coordinating with supporting units. Above and beyond the call. He paused. That's not a mistake. That's not a mistake on her file. He looked directly at Katie as she passed. That's a fact, Captain. The room went dead silent. Then, from the stairwell, the sound of boots on tile, heavy and deliberate, the rhythm of someone trained to move with purpose. A man in navy dress blues appeared in the doorway. General William Hayes, visiting his daughter upstairs, had heard the commotion and descended with the kind of presence that made the air pressure change. He saw Katie at the nursing station. Recognition flickered across his face. Without hesitation, without question, he stood at attention and rendered a formal salute, his fist moving to his chest in the traditional gesture of respect, and every person in that corridor understood in that moment that they were standing next to someone they had severely misjudged. Katie's jaw tightened fractionally. She returned the salute with the same precision. By the time Hospital Administrator Linda Chen arrived for the hearing that was supposed to determine Katie's fate, the hearing room was no longer a courtroom, it had become a reckoning. The Marine with the tattoo was there. The Marine who'd read the citation aloud was there. General Hayes remained standing in the corner, still in uniform, still at attention, a silent witness that carried the weight of the entire United States Navy. Dr. Pierce burst through the door with his face the color of a heart attack. Red. Flushed. The kind of panic that comes when a carefully constructed narrative suddenly shatters into 1,000 pieces. This is irrelevant, he spat, his voice cracking. Military service records have nothing to do with hospital protocol. Morrison violated chain of command, performed unauthorized procedures, acted recklessly without attending supervision. Dr. Pierce, Linda Chen said quietly, sliding a tablet across the table. Your phone. Right now. His phone screen lit up. 3 missed calls from a number he recognized immediately, Johns Hopkins Medical School. His mentor. The man who'd written his recommendation letters, championed his career, made the calls that got him hired at Cedar Creek in the first place. The voicemail played on speaker, not by accident but by design. Someone had called Chen and asked her to play it. The voice was ice. Marcus, I just watched a video of you cowering in a supply closet while a decorated combat officer saved a civilian's life. I watched you suspend her for that. What happened to you? I don't recognize the person you've become. The hospital board will be hearing from me. We're done. Don't contact me again. Silence. The kind that tastes like metal. Pierce stared at his phone as if it might spontaneously combust. General Hayes stepped forward. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of command structure that didn't require volume. I've already contacted the Navy Medical Corps liaison. They're reviewing why a decorated officer was terminated for performing life-saving measures. We take that very seriously. He paused. We take a lot of things very seriously, Dr. Pierce. Then Linda Chen's tablet displayed something else, pages of Apex Medical Solutions invoices, each one bearing Dr. Pierce's signature. Medical supplies that were never received. Procedures that were never performed. $40,000 in fraudulent billing spread across 6 months. Someone sent these to the board this morning, Linda Chen said. Along with a detailed accounting of how your arrangement with Apex Medical functioned. Catherine Morrison reported these irregularities in March. You denied the claims. You removed her database access instead of investigating them. Pierce's face drained of color. I can explain. No, Linda Chen said. You can't. The State Medical Board opened an investigation that same week. By Friday, Apex Medical Solutions owner, Richard Vance, Pierce's college roommate, the architect of the kickback scheme, was arrested by the FBI for healthcare fraud. By the following Monday, Pierce's allies on the hospital board had all distanced themselves, phone calls conveniently missed, messages suddenly discovered in spam folders. His wife received a call from Johns Hopkins Medical School informing her that his name was being removed from the Alumni Achievement Wall, a small, surgical act of erasure that carried enormous weight. The local news ran the video again. Over and over. The headline this time, Decorated War Hero Fired After Saving Civilian's Life. The story didn't mention Pierce by name, it didn't need to. Everyone in Raleigh knew exactly who the hospital administrator who suspended her referred to. 6 months later, the Cedar Creek Medical ER director's office had a new occupant. Captain Katie Morrison sat at her desk reviewing staffing schedules, her hand steady on the keyboard, her bearing shifted back into the authority she'd been hiding. The office walls had been repainted. A small photograph of her fire team sat beside her computer, 3 faces crossed out in Sharpie, the empty space where the 4th used to stand marked with a date, 2011. And beside that photo, placed carefully in the drawer but left slightly open so the triangular fold of red, white, and blue fabric was visible, the flag from a teammate who didn't make it home. Not hidden in shame anymore. Kept close as a reminder. Corporal Dawson walked in during his follow-up appointment, his arm still bearing her call sign tattooed across his forearm. He saluted, habit and respect mixing in the gesture. Good to see you, Captain. Katie smiled, a real smile, not the constrained expression of a woman trying to disappear. Good to see you too, Jake. How's the shoulder? Range of motion improving. Physical therapy says I'll be back to rotation in 8 weeks. He paused. Saw the video. Saw the whole thing go down with the director. You walked toward the gun. Someone had to, Katie said simply. Someone had to walk toward it. In a classroom at Raleigh Community College, Dr. Marcus Pierce stood in front of 15 bored high school students fulfilling a health credit, teaching CPR fundamentals for $18 an hour. His medical license hung in restricted status, educational settings only, never clinical, never any proximity to patient care again. He demonstrated chest compressions on a plastic dummy while a student in the back row scrolled through her phone, completely unaware that the man in front of her had been a teaching hospital physician just 6 months earlier. That he'd had authority. That he'd had colleagues who respected him. That he'd thrown all of it away trying to destroy someone stronger than him. Katie conducted morning rounds with her ER staff. A new resident, fresh out of medical school, eager and uncertain, asked her about the field thoracotomy, the moment that had changed everything. "How did you stay so calm? How did you not freeze?" Katie glanced at the flag on her desk, the folded triangle visible in its drawer. "Someone once told me that power isn't a title. Power is the ability to help. When you remember that, when you understand that down in your bones, the fear becomes smaller than the mission. It doesn't disappear. But it becomes manageable. It becomes data instead of panic." The resident nodded slowly, absorbing this. Understanding that this wasn't something you learned in medical school. This was something you earned by surviving. Through the ER windows, Cedar Creek Medical sign gleamed in the morning light. Katie Morrison moved through the corridors with the easy precision of someone who knew exactly who she was, no longer invisible, no longer hiding, no longer waiting for permission to exist. Her limp was steady. Her hands were ready. And when the next crisis arrived, when the next impossible moment demanded more than anyone should have to give, she would walk toward it without hesitation, because that's what warriors do. That's what heroes do. And nobody in Cedar Creek Medical had any doubt anymore about which one she was. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were standing next to, I'd ask you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss what happens when quiet people suddenly decide to stop being quiet. Leave a comment. Have you ever judged someone only to find out you were completely wrong about them? And share this with someone who needs to remember that power isn't about titles or authority. Power is the ability to help when everyone else runs away. Thank you for listening.